Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz interview series with Jazz Multi-Instrumentalist, big band leader, and teacher Scott Reeves. He's a Chicago native that attended Indiana University and studied improvisation with David Baker, Woody Shaw, and Kenny Werner. He is promoting his latest 2018 CD, Without a Trace. And these days he teaches at the City College of New York, where he holds the rank of tenured full professor and also presents workshops and concerts throughout the United States, Canada, Japan, and Italy. We'll find out more about that. So get to know him and dig this interview, my friends.
Scott, thank you for taking a minute out for Neon Jazz. I appreciate it.
It's my pleasure.
So let's talk about your latest album. It's a great album. I had a lot of fun listening to it. I want to know from you, how do you feel about this release?
You know, I've been in New York for a couple of decades here, playing with a lot of great players and doing a lot of writing. About 10 years ago, I put together my own big band, which includes people like Steve Wilson on alto saxophone and Tim Marmacosta on tenor, Jim Riddle on piano. And we played for a long time before I decided we were ready to record. 2 years ago, we did our first CD, which is called Portraits and Places. We followed up with that with the recent release, Without a Trace. I'm very happy with both of these. The guys and ladies, as we have Carolyn Lenhart singing with the band too. And they did a wonderful job with the recording. It was well produced. I had good production values all the way through, so I was very happy the way it turned out. And in particular, the music on these two CDs is basically what I've done with the last 20 years of my life, writing this music and getting it played and perfecting it and fine-tuning it. So I kind of feel, in some respects, that it's one of my achievements in my life that I feel the most proud of.
Let me ask you this. Did you grow up in Chicago?
I grew up in the Chicago suburbs, Park Ridge. My sister went to high school with Hillary Clinton. So you can kind of pinpoint the area from that. Yeah.
So talk to me about your childhood and how you got so interested and involved in jazz.
Well, I went to a very good high school called Maine East in Park Ridge, and we had a concert band, an orchestra, choruses, and a jazz band. And I got bitten by the jazz bug in junior high school, and that was somewhat serendipitous. I happened to go into a record store and saw this album by this guy I'd never heard of called Count Basie, and I was very intrigued by it, and bought it and went home, and it just totally blew my mind. After then, I became a total jazz maniac, and listening to Basie led me to people like Kenton, and that led me to people like Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie, and that led me to Miles Davis, and that led me to John Coltrane and Herbie Hancock and that whole world. And by the time I was a junior in high school, my fate was sealed, much to my parents' chagrin.
So you go to Indiana University, you get a BM in trombone and MM in jazz studies. What did you learn in college that helped you so much as a professional?
Well, Indiana is an exceptional music school. And, I mean, when I was there, Michael Brecker was in the middle of dropping out of school and going to New York. Many other great players were there as well. So many of the people I went to school with went on to careers, and there was a high level of expectation. But I would have to say most significantly were my classical trombone teachers, former Philharmonic people that really taught me the basics of good brass playing, and my jazz teacher, David Baker, who just passed away this past year. And he really got me started on what it is to improvise, and also got me started in arranging too. So most of whatever I had as my beginning point really came from David Baker.
Well, you also learned from Woody Shaw and Kenny Werner. What was that like?
Well, that's interesting because I was already well into my career, and in fact, I had taught at some universities. I currently teach at City College of New York, where I've been for the past 19 years. But at that time, I was teaching at a university in Portland, Maine. And I knew the mechanics of jazz. I had learned everything David had taught me about chords and scales, and I'd even written 2 books, Prentice Hall published, Creative Jazz Improvisation and Creative Beginnings, that dealt a lot with the harmonic, melodic structure of jazz. But when I would hear the very best players play, I knew that there was something beyond that I was interested in learning. Where's the magic come from? You know, once you have the mechanics, what's the magic? That's a very difficult thing to teach and a very difficult thing to talk about. A lot of the great artists I spoke to would say, well, you either have it or you don't, or, you know, things like that are not very helpful to somebody who wants to improve their playing. And I went to the lecture with Kenny Werner. It was at a Jazz Educators convention, you know, the IAJE. And he was directly talking about how to create the magic and what's going on in your brain. And I was also interested in Zen Buddhism, and there were a lot of things he was talking about that were very similar to that. And so when I was still living up in Maine, I used to take my summers off from teaching and drive down to New York just to study with him and, of course, hang out and go to sessions and soak up the Manhattan scene. And it really freed me up in a lot of ways. One thing Kenny told me that I always tell my students is that the military, the conscious mind is like the military. You need an army to protect the government, but you don't want them to take over the control of the country. In other words, the conscious mind, the intellectual mind is there to support the structure of the music, but you don't want to lead with that. You want to lead with intuition. And he had developed a really interesting approach to teaching that. So that was tremendous help to me. But that came much later in my life. That was like finishing school.
So when you look back on your career, you've been all over the place, all over the world. You've had a lot of great experiences. What are you proudest of? What really kind of stands out as, you know, maybe a memory or two that really are seminal in your career?
Wow. There's so many. I'm just finishing my 39th year of teaching at the university level, and I've been out in Washington State, in Bellingham, Washington. I taught there. I taught for a while in Memphis, Richmond, Virginia, and Portland, Maine before I finally got to New York. You know, working with the students in particular in all these locations gave me tremendous pleasure, just making that contact and trying to help them in their personal growth. Since I've been in New York, there's been so many wonderful experiences. On the faculty, when I joined the faculty at City College, was the great bassist Ron Carter. So getting to play with him was an exhilarating, if not somewhat intimidating experience. And, you know, just meeting so many great musicians here in New York. I mean, New York is not an easy place to live in, but it's a tremendous place to learn how to play jazz because there's so many wonderful players here that you can rub shoulders with, and it really forces you to take your game up to a higher level. Aside from those experiences, I've been lucky to be able to do some workshops in Italy and Japan, and those were pretty amazing experiences too, because they're incredible cultures there and history that after I did my work in music and teaching, then I would always spend some time just being a tourist there and soaking up the sights. So I have fond memories of that as well.
You know, the trombone is not the first instrument that people tend to gravitate towards, and it's a very unique. It's a very unique instrument. There was a cat in Kansas City recently that was playing, and I was just watching them, and I think about all the instruments that have these specifics on there. You got a fret on a guitar, you got all of these different instruments or heads on drums, and you have all these specifics. But with the trombone, you just kind of go in and out. I mean, you have places to stop, and you go in. You got latitude. There seems to be more of a ambiguity, a specific ambiguity that goes into it. So tell me why the trombone was your instrument, and what is the magic of the instrument?
Well, the trombone is unique, as you pointed out. it dates back to the 16th century before valves were even invented. And yeah, you can manipulate the pitch in a much different way than on a keyed or valved instrument. It's probably one of the instruments most closely related to the human voice in that there are no set keys or buttons to push, and yet it's all created by the sound of wind moving across part of your body. In case of a vocalist, that's your larynx, but in the case of a trombonist, it's your lips buzzing. So it is a beautifully melodic instrument. The range of the tenor trombone is the range of most male voices. I got into it just simply because my father used to play, and we had one in the home. But I love its rich, sonorous sound, and I'm very grateful that I had lessons from classical teachers because they figured out a lot of the technical issues over the many decades, and that has helped preserve my playing career. And I feel like I'm still growing as a player, actually. There's always something new to learn. But in more recent years, I've grown towards some very unusual brass instruments. I'm now playing an instrument called the alto flugelhorn, which is not commonly seen in this country. It's more of a German brass band instrument. And I've also recently had an instrument built specifically for me that no longer exists called a alto valve trombone. So I play these three instruments together, and they each open up a different side of my musical personality.
So let me ask you about your career up to this point. You've had a very long and lustrous teaching career, performing, you're recording still. How do you feel about your career?
I feel like I'm just getting started. I didn't move to New York until I was 49. I'm 67 now. And as I said earlier, that, I knew how to play well, and I taught for a long time, and but bringing it up to that higher level, you almost have to be in a place like New York where you're sitting on the bandstand with people like Rich Perry or Ron Carter, people that are really masters of the art, and somehow you have to hold up your end. So it really causes you to practice a lot more and go out and check out people and really try to learn as much as you can. And every time you think you learn something new, there's something else you didn't even think about. So I feel like I'm still growing. Downstairs I have a bunch of Bob Brookmeyer scores that as soon as I get done with the CD release, I'm going to start working my way through those and analyzing them. I've been teaching a course on Duke Ellington and Gil Evans for my graduate students, and I want to spend a lot more time going through their scores and seeing how they got that sound. I'm still practicing a lot every day. So there's so much to learn, and I can't think of a better way to spend the rest of my career than just to keep doing what I'm doing.
So speaking of learning from live shows, what live jazz shows have you witnessed that have really moved you quite a bit?
Well, that's also a big question. Well, when I first got into jazz, when I was in high school, I went to hear Basie's band live, and that really moved me. And in fact, on that same program, there was another guy I had never heard of. I'm 15 at this time, just getting into jazz, a guy by the name of Miles Davis. And Basie went on, and I thought, great, I get this. I feel what they're doing. I know where this is headed. And then Miles came on. This was a concert at Orchestra Hall in Chicago. And I had no idea what they were doing. It was the group with Herbie Hancock and Ron Carter and Tony Williams. And there were actually two tenor players, Wayne Shorter, and years later I did some research and found out that he had added Joe Henderson to that tour. And they were playing things from Nefertiti and Miles Smiles and things like that. And it just went right over my head. I felt like it was almost an out-of-body experience. I had a similar almost out-of-body experience when a couple of years older, but still in high school. I bought Wayne Shorter, somewhat obscure record, but I consider it a real masterpiece. It's called The All-Seeing Eye. And I put that on, and I had no idea what was going on, but somehow it just moved me in a certain way. Miles' album ESP is another, what I consider life-changing album for me. When I put that on, I was just like, wow, what is this? You know, it seemed like some magical incantation or something. And one problem with teaching so long, though, is it gets harder and harder to have those sort of primal music experiences. You hear so much good music, and then you have a tendency to want to critique it all in your mind and analyze it and take it apart for its strengths and weaknesses, that it takes something really special to just kind of blow you away. But it still occasionally happens.
So why do you love jazz?
Why do I love it? That's another good question. Because I think it engages all sides of myself. Certainly it grabs my body, because particularly swing and the rhythms of jazz just go right to my soul, make my body want to move. Much, not to put down another kind of genre, but I never had that experience with rock. Rock just seemed too obvious to me or something, where the beat was, and maybe too forceful in some ways. But when I heard jazz, it just really spoke to my body. And then it also speaks to the intellectual side, too. You know, I started hearing these rich chords that Gil Evans is writing and things like that. And I wanted, wow, what was that? How did he get that sound? And I started, trying to delve into the structure of it. And, and of course, just the mood, putting on a Bill Evans record makes you feel a certain way, and maybe putting Miles at the Fillmore on makes you feel in an entirely different way. So I'm picking old records here. I'm dating myself, but it appeals to me on many levels and still has the power to excite me.
So let's get to the essence of who you are. Everyone has a version of you, your family, your friends, your students, your colleagues, but you're the one that's in control of your life. What's your perception of who you are?
Well, I feel like I'm a citizen of this planet, and I feel that, part of the world community. I mean, one thing that's kind of distressing me about the current climate these days is we seem like we're trying to be so factionalized into different groups. And, if you see pictures from space, there's no borders at the countries. It's all one planet with clouds moving from one area to another. I've been able to do some travel internationally. People are basically the same everywhere. And I feel like I identify more with being a citizen of the planet. And I try to, as much as I can, everybody has their ego and everybody has their agenda, but I try to approach people with compassion. And again, it's something I've got in and out of my meditation practices. Try to be compassionate with people and, realize that there's a basic humanness that binds us all together.
I agree. That's a great way to wrap everything up. Scott, thank you for taking a minute out to talk about the new album, about your life and music. It's been a great one, man. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you for your interest in the opportunity to talk, and keep turning Kansas City on to great jazz, okay?
It's my pleasure, man.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to yet another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest players in Kansas City, Chicago, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. And thanks to Scott for his time, his stories, and his cool. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino on the iTunes Store. Visit neonjazz at youtube.com, and for everything Neon Jazz, go to the neonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends.
Neon Jazz.